So I want to welcome everybody. This is actually our third public information session for the Academy Project. I'm Peggy Lyons, your first select woman, and I'm joined here tonight by three of our board members, Al Goldberg, Jen Gordon, and Scott Murphy. And I know Bruce couldn't be here, but he did attend the other two, so he got a free pass this time.
He's driving the bus.
He's driving a bus. So. But I just want to say that we, as our board, has worked very closely together on this to ensure that any final decisions on the Academy project are made not by us, but by the public that approved it in the first place back in 2020. We come to you before you with mixed emotions, disappointed that we can't accomplish this, what I consider a transformational project for our town within the original budget that was approved back in 2022, but also proud of how far we have come since that vote, and excited to show a way forward to make it happen using outside grants we've already been awarded, which will allow us to deliver a building that meets the public expectations. So I have these pictures here to show that Academy is not just an empty eyesore in our downtown, which we've been living with for the last 20 years, but has played a very important role in the history of our town for almost 140 years. And ultimately, the decision to proceed with the future of the Academy Community Center idea rests in the hands of all of you, the people of Madison, where it all originally began, because this has really been a community-driven project from day one. And I just, on this next slide, highlight that we wouldn't be here today without all the passion and perseverance of so many volunteers in our community over the last 20 years who have worked so hard to preserve this treasured building in the heart of our town. And one of the unique things about Academy is its location. It's not just a building so we can have programming, it's in the center of our downtown, and it bookends this beautiful library on one end, and then we have our wonderful town green on the other end. And this slide highlights, you can see it through all the stuff going on here that Jean's doing, is all the different committees that brought us to this community center proposal that the town voted on in 2022. So if you look at this, you know, even when it was turned over to the town in 2011 by the Board of Education, it had been closed in 2004. There were multiple public, volunteer committees that tried to figure out what to do with this building. And they researched and analyzed. We had experts, we had engineers, market consultants, and people came back with different ideas, but there was no consensus on what to do with the building. And the one thing that bubbled up to the top was the community center concept. And that's what got approved in 2022. So there's been a lot of work put into this. And I don't know how many of you in here sat in those meetings about housing. When there was plans to, I think it was back in 2018, where there was plans to actually put housing all over the ball fields and renovate Academy into a housing. So it got as far as that. There was actually an RFP that the town put out on that. So we've really covered the gamuts. I remember sitting on a committee I was on the LoCap committee a long time ago when I was on the Board of Finance, and we talked about, do we turn it into commercial space? Do we have it retail? Do we have restaurants? So it's not as if we haven't explored all these ideas, but there's so many different interests in the building, and one of the core things that held it all together was that this was a building that had so much history with our community, and it's a landmark in our town. So people wanted to preserve the building, and so they're finding ways, how do we preserve this and make it valuable to the town and make it productive for the town? And that's ultimately what led to the community center proposal. I highlighted here also the building committee, and I think we have some members here, and Joe Valentine, the chair, is going to talk a little bit later, but they are the ones that have been spending the last 2.5 years digging into this and really working through what has been a very challenging project, and we'll talk more about that a little later. So move on to the next slide. So why are we here today? Well, just to highlight again, I'm sorry, I'm seeing that going, and I'm like, I don't know. So we're here today because back in 2022, the town voted to bond for $15.9 million as a budget to convert Academy into a community center. The community center was the only proposal that actually made it to referendum after 18 years of discussion and debate. Voter turnout was at 36% for that referendum, which is very much in line with other referendums that we've held here in town for projects. And it passed handily, 55% yes, 45% no. Unfortunately, we had to go through a process of appointing a building committee and then starting to look at designs. And by the time we actually started looking at the cost proposals for this, we realized we did not have the budget to deliver what people had voted on. And the board has learned this both from the building committee and come to our own conclusions. And we have, one of the delays is we were trying to figure out how can we make this work with the 15.9? You know, is there a way to do that? Can we take this out of the project? Can we focus on the front section of the building? And there just really was no way to kind of skin that cat to make it all work within $15.9 million, where people felt we weren't going to get short change on what we were getting, or make big commitments for the future. Because I know there's a lot of residents concerned that there was just going to be more money pumped into this after the first phase was done. And so the board recognizes that the core budget does not allow a finished product for this. And then we went out to bid because we weren't sure we were going to land. We did this last fall. We knew we were going to be short. We thought maybe $2 to $3 million. And unfortunately, we got bids back that were significantly more than the budget. And so there was a range of $5 to $7 million depending on what you included in those packages. So we knew we just didn't have the funding to move forward. Now the good thing is the town was very aggressive at going after grants. And we received one from the state of Connecticut for $4 million, and we received another grant from the federal government, from the USDA, for $3.625 million. Now, the way the bonding was approved, those grants were supposed to apply to reduce the bonding. And so what we're asking now is to allow us to use those grants to pay for the project, rather than just reduce the bonding. So we add it to the budget versus subtract it from the bonding for the project, and that's what this vote is about. We're not looking for additional bonding authorization. We're not looking to use funds in our CIP program, right? We need, in order to construct the building as we want to see, we want to take the grants and apply it to the construction budget. And we have to do that through a public vote. And that's what May 6th is all about. And so this will be the third question on the ballot that goes through. First question will be, I think, on the town budget, the second on the Board of Ed, or it might be flipped to approve that. That's our annual budget referendum. And I don't know how many here have voted in that, but we don't get a high turnout for that. So I just want to make sure you understand that our town budgets are on that ballot as well. And I encourage everybody to vote yes on those. But there'll be a third question related to this. So the next just talks about why community center. And this is pretty much a refresher. There was a long process that got us to this. And it kind of hits a lot of different buttons for a lot of different people in the community. So whether if you're a preservationist and love the beauty of the building and the vintage of the building, want to preserve it, that's drove some people to support this. It's repurposing something that is right in the heart of our community. It gives needed space for indoor and outdoor recreation programming. I kind of call it a center of arts, education, and culture, because we have this kind of space in the front. We're kind of calling it a recital hall. There's a stage and meeting rooms. And then on the back end, you've got the gym, and then you have these big classrooms throughout it. So it kind of offers space for all different types of programming. It also solved a problem for town needs. When we brought this to referendum, one of the complaints I'd heard about this project was it's just a big empty building, it's too much space, and there's not going to be anybody in it all day. And we had a study conducted in 2021 that showed some town departments that need space. So we said, well, let's kill two birds with one stone. Let's take some of those needs that our departments have and let them use some of the space, and then you have vibrancy in the building all day long. You're going to have employees, you're going to have different people, constituents going in and out of the building. And so Youth and Family Services was one identified, and we'll talk about that a little later. And then Beach and Recreation is going to be managing a lot of the programming. And then, so there's also this concept of economic engine and economic vibrancy. Having that building busy and utilized is going to help the downtown. And a lot of people here had commented in other sessions about they remember when it was a school. You know, you had parents going in and out picking up the kids, activities going on all the time. There was a level of vibrancy in our downtown area that now that that's been vacant for 20 years has been lost. And so that's going to bring back that level of activity that helps our businesses, and it creates just more activity in our downtown. And then, you know, we talk about a cultural corridor, which is really connecting like our center, these two important historic institutions in town, bookending our Main Street. The library on one side, and they complement each other. I know a lot of people talk about overlap, but they're really not overlapping. There's going to be a lot of things going on at Academy that the library can't offer, and there's going to be a lot of things that the library offers that Academy can't offer. And there was actually a study about moving the library into Academy, and that's online and available as well if you go back and look. So everything's been looked at. And this just highlights visually, if you go to the next slide on Community Center, the one that has the picture. Yeah, oh sorry, the bookends, yeah, okay. A strategic plan, just real quickly, we adopted this in 2023. This concept kind of falls on that and hits a lot of the hot buttons of what the community is looking for with a community center. And so it's just, I think it aligns very much with what the town wants to invest in the future. Next slide is just talking about the history. And I just don't know how many people know about the fact that the land was gifted to the town. There was another building that was there, and then ultimately there was a decision by the town in the 1920s to move the old Hand Academy and to put in a high school that would consolidate, or a school building on that site that would consolidate 11 one-room schoolhouses. So I thought it was kind of interesting. That's what was the first time the town of Madison in the 1920s pulled all the one-room schoolhouses into one building. And they approved construction of the school on the site for $151,000. And then they added an addition in the 1935 that added 4 more classrooms in the gym. So that's that other brick piece on the end a lot of people talk about. That was added in the 30s because the town was thriving. And interestingly, we received a federal grant for that. A WPA grant of $45,000. So even back then, back during the Great Depression, the federal government saw the wisdom in investing in our town. And I think that's testament to what's going on now with the USDA willing to infuse additional money into this project through the $3.6 million grant that we've received today. So, so it just aligns with the history of that. And then it was turned in once the new high school was built on Green Hill Road in the late 50s. The high school moved. They got a release from Daniel Hand's family so that they could move the name, and they were able to do that. And they turned it into an elementary school, and then it closed in 2004. So there's a lot of great history. I encourage you to go into the files online to do that. Since then, we talked about the committees that have been formed. And then ultimately in 2019, they did a poll in 2018 that said people wanted a community center, and they asked about a lot of different things. That drove the Board of Selectmen to set up a committee that then the Academy Community Center Design Committee, they came up with the proposal that really we see today. It was a budget created, a general design, and then that turned into a plan to take it to referendum in 2020, but then COVID hit. And I think the Board of Selectmen said, we really need to kind of take a pause for a year to see what's going to happen with the economy. Can we even have gathering spaces? So investing in the community at that time, we just weren't sure where we were. Notably, that was the time the library was opening too. So it was a real struggle to talk about community gathering spaces at that time. So we took a pause for a year. We kind of freshened back up. We redid the proposal. We included some of the town departments into the space. And then went out in 2022 to let the people decide the community center idea, and that's when it passed. Since then, we've had a building committee was formed, as well as a committee, Academy Advisory Committee. And the Academy Advisory Committee was there to make sure that we were able to offer all the programming, hear what people wanted to see in the building, because this is going to be multifaceted, multi-generational, serving a lot of different people. So how do we make sure that when we renovate this building, we can address all those wants and needs from the community in the design? And so Bill will talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. We got the Urban Action Grant in 2022 from the state of Connecticut. I think the single largest grant this town has ever received from the state, outside of school funding, but as a one-off grant. And then, the building committee and the advisory committee went through their processes, and we'll talk about that later. In 2024, we were awarded the federal USDA grant. And then that's when we started seeing more significant headwinds with the pricing, starting in 2023 and 2024. And that's when the board said, don't rush, take your time, figure this out, see if there's designs that can get us to where we need to be within the existing budget. No one wanted to have to go out and ask the public for approval for more funding. So, but we also knew this federal grant was looming too, so we thought, well, we've got all this grant money coming, let's just see where we land on all this. And then the committee went out to bid, and that's when we came back. So we thought we were gonna be $2 to $3 million short. It went out to bid, and that's when at the end of last year, in December, we found out we had this much more significant budget gap. And that's when our board then said, okay, let's let the people decide. We didn't feel we could say, well, we don't have the money, you know, but we have these grants, because if we don't move forward, we lose that $7.6 million. So our board chose, let the people decide. Let the town decide if they want to take that grant money and add it to the budget so we can get this project done. And that's why we're here today. So moving on to the next, I will turn this over to Bill Stapleford, who chaired the advisory committee, and he can talk about the excellent work they did as well as the survey. Can everybody hear okay? I didn't even use the microphone, so we're good? Okay.
Thank you, Peggy. The Academy Advisory Committee first met in September of 2022. Our charge was to develop guidance and recommendations for the building committee about what types of activities the public most wanted to see in the building, and therefore what types of features in the building could accommodate those requests. We were a committee of 9 members. We met once a week, and we submitted our final report in March of 2023. You can find this report online at MadisonTV.org/academy. So how did we go about assessing what Madison residents wanted to see in this building? We developed first an online survey, and for that I want to credit John Lamarand, our committee member, for the technology. And in order to get the word out to the public, we printed hundreds of postcards and distributed them widely through the community. We made many outreach efforts. We attended all kinds of events, school events, town events, businesses, and on the postcard was the website for the online survey, and also a QR code. People could fill it out on their iPhones. We also got articles in the local press. We ended up with 2,049 complete responses. And overall, those responses, the people that completed the survey, pretty accurately matched the demographics of the town, including teenagers, parents of young children, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, 40-somethings, all the way up to seniors. All of those demographic groups were pretty accurately represented according to the population. What did we find? Those primary results are on the screen to my left. The most important consideration that people wanted to find in the community center were arts and entertainment. And this covered the waterfront of music, vocal music, instrumental music, theater, dance, studio art, painting, drawing, ceramics, pottery, crafts, photography. All of these were very adequately represented. People wanted to see those. What's interesting is that there was a vast interest in lessons. People wanted cooking lessons, art lessons, music lessons, all these things which could potentially be revenue-generating activities for the building. The second most requested items were community space. If you recall, this survey took place shortly after the COVID pandemic. People were eager to meet with each other. They were looking for gathering spaces, just a place to meet casually, in addition to a request for meeting space for organizations in town. People wanted areas available for private gatherings, for celebrations. They wanted outdoor public access to restrooms, businesses, and exhibit space. Next were sports and recreation. You name it, everything under the sun. With the gymnasium available, people wanted exercise and fitness classes, pickleball, basketball, volleyball, table tennis, pool table, climbing wall. There's a lot of people in town who like physical activities and were seeking opportunities to engage in them. Finally, activity rooms. Strong desire for youth social space, for a teen room for the teens to gather when they're not in school. People wanted to see a cafe lounge, a place just to go, and maybe parents wait for the kids while they're in the class just to hang out. We have visions of kind of like a little coffee cafe with coffee and pastries available during the day. Again, meeting rooms for organizations. A big ticket item, people were looking for multi-generational opportunities, places where people of different generations could mix and interchange with each other. Crafts, that kind of ties in with arts and entertainment. Again, people are looking for activity space to engage in their hobbies. After we completed the survey, we then held 4 focus groups. First of all, with professionals from the performing arts, then professionals from the studio arts, then professionals in culinary arts, and finally, we met with Daniel Hand High School youth at the high school. Principal Mr. Salutary was kind enough to let the students complete the survey on their iPhones during school hours, so that got a big response. And some of us met with a group of 40 high school students. This was a leadership council, and they told us what they were looking for in a community center. Not surprisingly, they said the more it's like school, the less people want to go there, so they wanted their own space without supervision, but that was their wish list. So anyway, with these performing arts, studio arts, culinary arts, we got direct feedback from professionals in those fields about what types of features we should have in the building to accommodate the community's needs. So that's what we did and the results we came up with. It's all yours again, Peggy.
Yeah, thank you. And I know you conducted a lot of interviews with different groups that specialize in some of the programming that would be in there.
We did.
And that report, I think, really did have an important piece of work that the building committee. So I want to introduce Joe Valentine, who's on the Academy Building. He's chair of the Academy Building Committee, to talk a little bit about their efforts, which has been quite extensive, and a lot of volunteer time gone into this over the last 2.5 years.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
One of the things about having a committee formed here in Madison is there are a lot of talented people in this town. And we managed to gather, the board actually managed to gather 7 people with varied talents. I'd like to recognize Joan Walker, who is there. She was one of them. We've had other committee members attend here, and their input and the time that they spent was well appreciated, and I think came with we've come up with some good recommendations that were were brought together by the people who were on the committee. 7 volunteer members. We were charged with to ensure the design plans fill the original vision of Academy. That the vision that we were using was the vision of the that was voted on the 2022 referendum. First thing after a few meetings, the first thing we did was hire an architect and a project manager, and we decided on both QAM as the architect and Colliers as the project manager. They had been involved in this process and in a lot of the original work going back a number of years. We thought bringing them in would allow us to hit the ground running, to get the best of what the history was, and then to take their ideas and our ideas and combine them to what the future would look like for Academy. We had a lot of meetings. We had over 60 in 2.5 years. And of course, at first we were very enthusiastic. We were going to do something great for the town. But then every time we had an estimate, whether it was a professional or one that we did internally, the estimate came out higher than the last one, and then the estimate usually came out above the budget. And that was actually a pretty difficult time. I mean, we went through a lot of iterations of how could we meet the $15.9 million budget, and as Peggy said earlier, there was just no way. You ended up with a shell or a partial building, not what we had envisioned when we started the process. We eventually said we were going to, instead of looking at what we can get for $15.9, we said we were going to look at what it would take to build what the vision was from 2022, the 2022 referendum. We took that vision plus what Bill's committee had recommended, and we eventually came up with a design that we believe aligns pretty closely with the 2022 referendum and the needs of what Bill has asked. I've gotten some questions about what the individual rooms are. Some of them are specific to, well, the kitchens, like specific to a kitchen, but I think that there's going to be a lot of evolution as time goes on. That the general purpose spaces will be used for some things now, and there'll be things that we can't even envision now over the life of this building, that the public spaces and the individual rooms will be adapted for. If you go to the next slide, please. There you go. One of the first things we decided on was the entrance had to be at grade level, at ground level. The Academy has a fault in that it's half a story above grade level. So that means every single entrance on there is a step up to get to the main floor or a step down to get to the lower floor. So we took the entrance and put the elevator there at ground level and allowed us to give access, ADA access, any type of access from one point to any level of the building. We kept what used to be the library. Anybody who was there? It's the large space that faces you as you look in from Route 1, and that's going to be it's not going to be an empty space. That's going to be a recital hall, a general purpose hall. It's connected on either side to 2 classrooms, so it's a multi-purpose, and it'll give you a very large event space or public space, and a stage which is not the big stage. That's not the one that's in the gym, but a recital stage. The gym, again, a pivotal part of the building, but that has minor updates. It is not a full-size gym. It is essentially a recreational gym. It was designed for a high school, but with minor updates, it can be useful for all the things that Bill had mentioned earlier. The Madison Youth and Family Services, built in the town, and Building and Rec, the town section, and Building and Rec has a space to operate the building. Hangout area, concession, some of it was there it is. An art room, commercial kitchen, and additional rooms for general community use, sort of fill out what going to be the uses of the building. We did make some additions. Well, actually, I'll go to the removals first. The geothermal was in the original design and in the original 2022 referendum. It turned out that was not economical for the building of that size and of that age. And at the time, there was a lot of advanced work done in other forms of heating and air conditioning, and the geothermal was just too expensive. It had a very long payback, unacceptable payback. And some rooms had to have design modifications, And some of them were for finishing, which was, we tried to do some things at least, that held the original look and feel of the building. So it didn't look like, you know, a modern building. It had some touches of we kept some touches of the original building. Full replacement, the additions, full replacements of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, that's MEP. There were structural repairs. There will be of course, the elevator and main entrance. It was an addition. Improved public access. I think one of the gems of this is going to be the outside. When there's a lot of space around the building, and that space around the building, not using the fields, don't touch the fields. But the space around the building it will be a valuable public space that will add to what can be done at the green. It's not mentioned here, one of the problems with the septic system was that the original septic system was just outdated, and it did not have sufficient drainage to handle the people that were not going to be in the building. We had to relocate the drainage area, which turned out to be under the playground. That was the only place. So the playground, and I guess maybe it's fortuitous, because now the playground will be used for the drainage area, and the playground will actually be moved adjacent to the school. So it now becomes something that's integral to the school, and with easy access for parents and children to either be inside or outside. Fitness room we mentioned, and just as a note, there's the conduit for potential lighting and sound is at the larger stage, but there is no plans right now to renovate the big stage in the gym, which is a larger stage, for use. That would have to be a future plan future renovation if we decided to go ahead and do that. And that was never in the design.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight that the septic thing was a big, I mean, I know there's a lot of discussion about, we never thought we'd have to move the whole septic, and then when they started doing soils investigation to this whole other location. But the benefit is if you look at some of the site plans, because we had to rip up the entire parking lot and around it, it enabled us to come up with a much more functioning space and kind of connect it. And so when you see the renderings of some of the outdoor site around the building, I think it's a really attractive thing for downtown that it enhances it. So thank you for that. You have all my stuff too.
Okay, well, the clip's mine.
Yeah, they go wait, that's yours. Okay. So thank you for that, and I know this has been a long process for them, and we appreciate all the hard work the committee has done. So because I think they've come back with what could be a really incredible building for the town. The next page is just talking about the budget that we referred to before, and there was an original budget done in 2018 that came out of the Academy Community Center Design Committee, and they basically came up with a estimated project budget and design, and then really the only changes that we made when we went out to referendum was we added youth and family space in there, and we did some escalation for what was kind of normal construction costs back then, and the geothermal component. And so we didn't really do any other investigative work. We just took what had been done in 2018, grew the number a bit, made some tweaks to it, and then went out to the public. And so obviously then, since then, you know, the world has changed a lot since this passed in February of 2022, meaning that the cost of the project has just really gone up significantly. Why is that? I mean, the next slide tries to talk about that. I think one of the things was this building was closed in 2004, but then in 2011, when it was turned over to the town unfortunately took the position that it wanted to save money, and so it just shut off the building completely. It literally mothballed it. And that meant there was no utilities in it, which means the building really eroded significantly starting in 2011 because of that. And that erosion just continued and compiled over the years. So we knew there were going to be some problems, but then each year that it has been delayed, because of whatever reasons it's been delayed, it's just eaten away at the infrastructure. So the elements have gotten to the building. So that's caused some problems. There were obviously a few things that they weren't planning on changing, or at least minor modifications to in the construction design had to be addressed. And then, we can't ignore what happened to our world back in 2022. This got voted on, I think it was February 15th. And then at the end of February, that's when the Ukraine war started, and we started to see this escalation of inflation driven by multiple factors, economic, factors, but also global activities happening. And then also we were coming off of COVID, so there was all those supply chain constraints and everything else that created hyperinflation really for us over, and construction in particular got really, really hit hard. I mean, there are things, if you talk to people in the industry, I mean, the price has doubled of what it would have been back in 2021. So all of those things kind of compounded, and I know the perfect storm term has been overused many times, but that all kind of hit this project right when we were going in the design process, finding out all of these things with the building, and then getting hit with a construction market that is was exploding in terms of cost. So that's really kind of all the different reasons that got us to where we are. So I want to talk about the financing the project, and what the intention is to max out the bonding that was approved in 2022 at $15.9 million, and we presented some estimates of what that would cost the typical taxpayer, and then we tried to update those. And what's interesting is that there's actually been a slight shift downward in terms of the actual financing cost, because we've seen our tax base has grown a lot in Madison, and we all lived through this reval last year. We know our properties are worth a lot more. We've become a destination since COVID, so our real property base has grown. And so that means the cost of this is spread out over a wider base. So it's just a slight difference, but interest rates have gone up a little bit, but we've been really successful. We've already done 2 bond offerings because we're also paying for the school plan. And those have been very well received by the market. We still have a AAA rating. So the cost of financing hasn't been too much higher than what we forecasted, and we're spreading it out over a larger tax base. So if you look at this chart, and this is what was presented back in 2022, and we took the same chart and updated it for 2025, what the kind of average annual cost would be for that $100,000 of assessed value. So remember, your appraised value is what the town assessor says your property is worth, but then you're taxed on 70% of that. So this would represent that 70% assessed value. And so if your house is worth $100,000 assessed value, which most people's aren't in Madison, as we know, but you would be taxed over the life of the bond $23 a year for the Academy project for the bonding. So if your house is worth assessed value is $500,000, you take that $23 and multiply it times 5. So this is kind of gives you an idea of what the financing cost of this would be. We're not changing the amount of bonding we're doing. What we're doing, though, is we had these other grants that we received. Now, originally, those grants would have been netting off the bonding, so we'd have to bond less. But because the project is so expensive now, we want to take the grants and we want to pay for the budget rather than taking down the amount of debt. So, we have the $4 million grant from the state that we received, and then we have the $3.6 million grant that we received from the federal government. And I will say one of the other delays was we got awarded this in March of 2024, and it takes a year basically to really get a signed agreement with the federal government. It's a long process that you have to go through. And we were worried because obviously the world changed in January of 2025, and all of a sudden we were getting notices about federal grants and funding being held up. So if you talked to me in February, I wasn't sure, and that was one of the reasons the board was kind of like, do we even have this grant? Well, fortunately, it still went through. We got a signed agreement back. We got an obligation letter. We were actually just in communication with them last week. How can we start getting our reimbursements? And we kind of talked through that process. So we feel confident, that the money's there and we will see the money. We haven't had any other type of notification saying otherwise. So that we feel comfortable, and that's when the board said, okay, we've got all the documents in place, we're ready to go, let's go out and ask the public if we can use that on the project budget. So this is kind of the financing cost of the project. And then the next slide just highlights the building use, and it's pretty similar to how it was in 2022. There was a few little bit of tweakings to that. Page 17 talks about that, the town municipal space usage. In the original referendum, we were allocating roughly 14% to town operations for municipal operations. That's dropped down, we've tweaked it. You know, now that they've actually had architects plan this out a little bit more, it's more like 11.5%. But pretty much the same concept that back in 2022, Madison Youth and Family Services, it was identified through this town-wide study that we did in 2021. They need twice the square footage to do their work. And they've been kind of surviving, cobbling spaces here and there throughout town to meet their needs. And so moving them into this building would serve that purpose and give them the space they need. And then Beach and Rec is going to be managing a lot of the programming, so we wanted to have an office, somebody there all day, you know, overseeing programming in the building, and so that is the space that they would be having in there. But there's no other space allocated to any group. There's no leases. There's no, you know, there's been a lot of conversation out there, but anything. But this is the only thing allocated, and it's town purposes, town departments. Excuse me. Let me just go. So the other piece, there's the cost side, and we'll talk about that in a second, but just since we're talking about usage, I want to talk a little bit about revenue. A lot of questions about, are we going to make money off this? Are we going to be charging to use the space? And we absolutely are going to be charging. The plan all along, once we went under construction, the Board of Selectmen was going to be pulling together a building use and pricing policy. And then we'd start engaging with different groups to talk about how we would work that out and what type of program we would put through the building. So we haven't started that because it's we don't have a building to show people. It's really hard to say, here's a concept and do you want to use it? You know, I think there's been a lot of conversations, but until we actually have the building under construction, have a timeline, we can start having those conversations. And so there's going to be different kinds of revenue streams for this building. There's going to be what the town typically does with Beach and Recreation is we have vendors run the programs, they use town space, and people sign up through the Beach and Rec website, and then the town tags on a 25% administrative fee. So there's that kind of component to how the town generates revenue to cover the costs of offering these programs. The other thing is there's just using room use fees. And our largest, you know, building is Surf Club in terms of, you know, charging for room use fees. We get nominal fees from the senior center and Morrill Town Hall, but I think that that's all dependent on quality of the room, what they're being used for, and the types of programming they're trying to operate. So we've been doing survey work throughout other municipalities with their charging. We can't charge commercial rates because we have taxes and financing, so we have to be careful about that. But we're going to come up with a policy that will help recapture as many costs as we can as we move forward. We did do some little analysis about what would we need to, how much of that building space would need to be used in order to cover our costs. And just using typical municipal rates, which right now is very nominal. I think we charge Boston, what is it, $10? $15 an hour or something like that. So if you were to apply those types of fees, and we charge more for the Surf Club, and we kind of did a break-even analysis. We said, well, we would need the building to be 30% utilized on average throughout the year to cover our costs. And I leave that to you to decide if that's a reasonable thing, and that's not including other programming revenue, that's not including anything else. We're also going to have a cafe in there. But that is kind of saying, if you use just the basic fees that we currently have in place, how would you, would you be able to cover your costs? You need to have the building utilized of the rentable space. That's not the entire building, but the rentable space around 30%. So that's kind of the framework we were coming from, and as we go through this pricing policy, I think the board will really deliberate that. The goal is not to generate revenue, right? We have all the reasons we talked about earlier about why we're doing this, but we do want to make sure that we're offsetting as much as we can the cost of operating the building, to help us and help cover those costs. So what are the operating costs? Once again, in 2022, we showed what we thought it would take in terms of additional staffing, utilities, and maintenance. And then we just updated those numbers. And we re-looked at the staffing. We've learned some things the last couple of years. And we felt that, for example, Beach and Recreation, we needed that position to be slightly more elevated position, so the cost has gone up on that, and who we would hire to oversee this. And this would be all programming, but we need additional, we're gonna need somebody who really can kind of drive this, make it a successful center. And then we also feel like we need a facility monitor, because it's gonna be a very busy building. So we're gonna wanna have somebody there who can kind of, and these would be similar to like what you see at the on-campus gym, or what we have during the summer. So this would be more an hourly employee, just there to troubleshoot, point people in the right direction, so we added some hours for that. So pre-referendum, we were at about $300,000, and now our current estimates with all the inflation and everything is at about $400,000 a year for our estimates. So one of the big questions is, what if this fails? And I think we all, recognize we've come to the point now where we cannot deliver a community center. So the project is dead in the water. You can't really do anything to that building. You need at least $15.9 million to turn it into anything, because all that's covering is the core infrastructure. It's the HVAC, it's the plumbing, it's the septic. So no matter what you do for that building, you're gonna need to spend probably at least $16 million just to get the infrastructure done, and then whatever you want to turn it into is gonna be above that. So the community center concept is really not going to be able to happen if this fails. And I think our board it took a while to get there, because we all wanted, we gotta make this work, let's look at all the scenarios, but I think we came to that conclusion. So that's where our board then is gonna have to figure out what the next step is. And let's be honest, demolition is gonna have to be on the table. That is gonna have to be one of the things that we consider because of the condition of the building. And I don't know what interest there would be in the building because of the condition of the building, the cost to renovate it. Demolition is gonna cost us, we're probably gonna have to spend $3 to $5 million on that site, just to take it down, get rid of all the materials, and turn it into something that at least is presentable, because it's in the heart of our community. So there's gonna have to be a whole conversation. We're gonna have to still spend some significant funds. We will lose the grants. The grants are very much tied to the community center proposal. So we will not be able to redeploy that. I mean, we could go back and ask, possibly. I don't think the federal government will have a chance at that. It's very linked, and we even had some conversations with them. We can have some conversations with the state, but it's all tied to the community center proposal. So the grants would go away. We're still gonna have to spend some money while we're figuring this out to stabilize it so it doesn't continue to deteriorate more. So any decision really needs to be made very quickly by the board after the referendum. And then we're gonna still have all the operational, space needs that we talked about with youth and family services, and just demand from the community for unmet needs. So I don't have an easy answer. Because the town spent 20 years figuring out and said we want a community center, and so now we're gonna have, I know housing has come up, but you remember we did this in 2018, and even the developers were not interested in the building. They wanted the land around it, but they take the building in exchange, right? There was one group that did propose a possible renovation, but I don't think you can make the numbers work for affordable housing because the building is just such bad condition. So, so I think those were all discussed at length. We had 6 proposals, I think, from developers. You, Al and Scott, you were on the board.
4 that we brought to the public.
Yeah, 4 that was brought to the public. And so, housing was a big part of the conversation, but that included having all that additional land that the town, we heard very loud and clear from the townspeople that they did not want to give that up. So it'll be a conundrum. But I will say that I don't think we will make any other decisions without some sort of public vote on this. I don't think I feel comfortable taking the building down without the public voting to do that. So this step will be community center is off the table if it fails. Then we'll have to go through a process to decide how much money to spend and what to do with it after that. So it will just continue the Academy saga on. So next steps, we have these public information sessions. Tomorrow morning, the Board of Selectmen officially calls the question to referendum. So we will do that, and that means the town enters what's called the kind of quiet period. So we cannot advocate. So I know there was some comments at the last session that this is all one-sided. Well, I'm trying to push out why we did this. This is what we heard from the community. This is why the community wanted this. But starting tomorrow, we'll have to scrub all our materials and take out anything that's like advocating, but there'll be all the factual information about the history of the project, the cost, will still be online and available. So if you see a difference of what you're seeing tonight versus what you see tomorrow, that's because we had to kind of sanitize it and make sure it was not advocating in some way, telling you, advocating you to vote yes. Tomorrow it's going to be, here's the information, make your decision, but tonight's our last shot at this. So now, all you in social media, you can go crazy and influence people. We will be sending a postcard to all taxpayers, just like we did in the last referendum, first time the town had ever done that, telling them that there will be this vote on the budget referendum with the third question, so that'll be going out later this week. We have a special town meeting on April 22nd. That is just a procedural thing that we do to vote, where we adjourn and go to referendum. So there's no voting, it's not like a big public debate about the project, it basically is a procedural thing because we've already called the question. So this, and plus it's a bonding resolution that was approved at referendum, we really have to go back to referendum to change that resolution. So, so if you hear something about a big town meeting, you're welcome to come, but there's no action being taken or vote being taken at the meeting. Then we have the referendum, and then if it passes, we will spend May and June refining. We're going to put the bid package again. The bids that we received expired in March, and since we did not take up one of those results, we didn't have the funding for it. We're waiting. We're going to go back out to bid. We're making some modifications, trying to refine things, tweak them. And then we'll go out to bid over the summer with the hope that if it comes in within the budget, we can award a contract, and then it'll be roughly a year for construction. So I'm hoping that at the fall of 2026, we can open the academy, because in 2026 we celebrate our 200th anniversary as a town. We were founded in 1826 as a incorporation, and so it would be really wonderful to be able to open this building up in 2026 and celebrate Madison's history. So if it fails, as I said, the board is going to beat our heads against the wall for a couple months, but figure out how we're going to move this forward and figure out what our next steps are going to be. So with that, this is my marketing page again about why I think this is a great opportunity. You all have heard this many times. This is what also we heard from the community. I just want to remind people, this came from Madison residents to the boards, and at one point there was resistance from the board of selectmen, and then there was a determination, let the people have a vote, and that's what we did back in 2022, and people endorsed it. So, it's really up to you now, and I encourage everybody, if you just want to go to the last slide, to envision what this could be for our town and the heart of our town and a high-profile location, and encourage you to reach out to your friends and family and encourage them to vote. Just be a knowledgeable voter. That's all we expect at this point. And I know a lot of this is more just people have passions in different ways and strong feelings. I don't think at this point there's facts that are going to swing people as much as does their desire to make sure that this is saved for our town and repurposed into something that could add value. So with that, there's one last piece I'll put up here, and this is actually a virtual tour that Jeannie's going to put up, and then we'll take some questions. There's also an email address that was shown earlier, askacademy@MadisonTV.org, that we're posting the answers to those questions on the website, so you can email specific questions there if you don't want to ask anything tonight. So anyway, so you can see that again if you want, it's available on the website. And I just want to thank you all for coming out, and just, please peruse what you can. And so we'll have, open it up to questions, and we'll, got staff here, got board members here, so we will go, please.
Hi, thank you for the presentation, Peggy. Dennis Crowe, I like that. I've got a couple of questions. One is, what's going to happen to all the hazardous materials? The asbestos, the lead, the black mold. I mean, you got lead not only in the paint, but in the pipes and everything. I mean, is that going to be taken out? You don't want your kids in there and exposed to all this stuff, and Austin's going to be breathing it, I know that. But
This has been asked several times. We're going to be abating, a lot of the asbestos will be abated as part of the construction. That was part of the plan when it went out to bid in the fall. And I'm trying to think through the lead. There's different ways to approach lead, but we're not going to have any use in there that's not allowed. It's going to be safe. We're going to follow all safety standards, and any old building you're dealing with when you renovate it. So, and that's actually, there's some other questions posted online, or answers posted online to answer those questions. Okay?
I'll check those out. The cost that you had per 100 square feet, $100,000 worth of assessed value, those will get tacked on to our taxes now, but we also have the school that was just built. We just had a library cost. We also have the raising of Ryerson, which was supposed to have been included in the $89 million for Neck River, and apparently we don't have the money for that. And we also have whatever we're going to do with Jeffrey. Then we have the surf club that's going to happen. I think that our overall costs are going to be just piling up, and it's just, I don't know that putting one project out there on its own is being quite honest with the people. You got, if you say, here's our overall plan, and here's what it's going to cost you.
So this was, if you recall, voted on as part of multiple projects, and that was part of the thinking of people. Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello?
Okay. So back in 2022, if you recall, this was actually put on the ballot with the Madison School Renewal Plan, and that was partly because of the conversations that people wanted to understand the bigger picture of bonding and needs. So nothing's changed since 2022. We're bonding for $15.9 million. One of the things the town has been initiating over the last 5 years is what we call the Madison Investment Plan. And that is to make sure that we don't have peaks in the mill rate and spikes in the mill rate, spikes. And so what we've done is we've tried to save up as much for capital needs early on, what we can in the budget, and then as the debt rises in the budget, we can offset our contributions to our capital savings account, so they offset each other. We're all about mill rate management, and so we've been very successful at doing that so far. You'll see this budget is at 2.5% this year, and yet we've issued $40 million in debt, and our interest is going up substantially this year because of the school renewal plan, because those schools are almost done, or one of them is done. The new school is almost done. So I encourage you to look back at the budget presentation that I gave, and there's many, I'm big on PowerPoint charts, as you all know, that walk through how we are managing this, and it shows the debt outlook, the capital contributions, and part of the Madison Investment Plan is to tap outside funding, which is what we did here, so we can manage that. And we've been doing that on a lot of our other capital projects. So everything you're bringing up, this was all talked about in 2022. So people knew, well, yeah, and that's the thing. People have an opportunity to look at it in a different environment. There's no new unknown projects. The Surf Club has been talked about for 20 years as well. And we just started the master planning process. That will take several years to come up with the next phase for the Surf Club. The thing with the Surf Club, that's a different, completely, we got to decide what we want from that facility, because you can't just make repairs to that building. It's in a flood zone, and it's probably going to be washed away in 20 years with the rising sea level. So we have to really look at that whole complex and make some decisions, and that's going to take time. So when we're talking about, it's all about debt management. So we're looking out 10 years, trying to make sure that we can balance all this and afford it all.
I got one minor point of disagreement with you. That's that nothing has changed because we were told when we voted on the 15.9 that there would be about $8 million worth of grants. And
No, that was never presented.
it
We had
was-
no idea how many grants we were gonna,
That's true.
we had no idea. We said we were
But
gonna
I've
go
been in
after
the
grants,
meetings
Dennis.
and
Okay,
they
I do disagree with
promised.
that, and that is not an
Okay.
accurate statement, because we said we were gonna go after
So-
grants. But historically, the town has been successful at getting $1 million at the most, or $1.5 million. We never envisioned $7.5 million in grants. So I just wanna make that very clear.
Maybe spread it around now, let other people answer
Yeah.
questions.
Okay, so
I just
Dennis, I
have
think that's-
one last real quick one. When will the explanatory text be available?
That should be available by Wednesday morning.
Okay.
So, and I just want to encourage people to read that. That's the fact-based document that we put out, first time ever in 2022. The town did that for the referendums, and we're doing it for this one as well. Please.
I have two questions. Well, I think you answered one previously.
Name and address, sorry.
Alan Jewell, Partridge Lane. What's your name and address?
Scott Murphy, 63 Nursery Lane, Selection.
Okay, I believe you answered it earlier in the presentation. The question was, will the $24 million approximately hold? And I think you said you have to rebid it, and assuming it goes to referendum. So it could be anything.
So, 100% accurate. We have to rebid, and we are living in a very uncertain world.
Yeah, the tax
We
situation would make it a
feel-
lot higher.
Oh, yeah, we've talked a lot about that. So there is, if for some reason, you know, we go out to bid again in May, and it comes back at 30 million or 40 million, God only knows, because this building has had a
Exactly.
choppy ride, we can't move forward. And the board has capped
We're done.
this.
That was my
Yeah.
next
Yeah,
question.
we're done.
We're done.
We're
That
done.
was my next
Yeah.
question, okay? So let me ask you. If the price tag was 34 million instead of 24 million, would we still be here today trying to find a way forward? Or
Well-
would we figure it out was more than the taxpayers can handle?
Well, the taxpayers are handling what they voted on in 2022. The money, the reason we settled on,
Could've been a lot less than that, though.
we were fortunate that the bids came back at, the gap is roughly what we already received in grants. And that was just luck. So that's why we decided to move forward. If the bids had come back at $35 million, I don't know if the board would have felt comfortable trying to get, I don't think the Board of Finance would have supported.
I think the Board of Finance, if they did their
Yeah.
job, would have stopped it, yeah.
Well, and I think the Board of Selectmen knew from day one that we didn't want to increase the bonding resolution. So it was, if we can make this happen with grant money, let's go for it. We've got them. So that is why we're here. We want the town to decide, because we do have those grants. If we didn't have the grants, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation today. So, yes.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Missouri. I live on Boston Post Road. I first want to say I'm very impressed by all the work that's gone into this, and the thinking and the care and the time and the explanation. It's very, very clear to me, a lot of aspects of this. I want to address the thing, though, that you just raised, and that is the change in the economy at this time. And there are two ways to think about it. That one way is because of what's happening in the economy, costs are just going to go up. But there's a second way to think about it as well that concerns me, and that's the grants themselves. So if I understand correctly, you have a signed agreement for the grants. However, to get the dollars from the grant, you have to submit invoices and you get reimbursed. I work in an institution in which hundreds of people are wondering whether their signed agreements for their research grants are actually going to be funded. So I would just caution all of us, not just you or me, but that in this changing economy, even if this goes forward, and even if we get a particular kind of bid that is consistent with the plan, I worry still that we're vulnerable. And it's because we don't know if the state will have the money because of the pressure being put on the state and the monies that are flowing, the lack of money now that's flowing into the state, and because the federal government is not keeping its promise with people with whom they've made an agreement.
So, you know, unprecedented times, right? You have a contract with the federal government, which is usually good as gold. We have a signed contract with the federal government. We have to proceed with what we know. And so people have to make that decision when they vote. Now, we also have opportunities and time, this is all gonna come to a head. The world can't just sit around for 2 years and not go forward on these things,
But I'm
right?
concerned things
I-
will crash
Well-
after we've accepted.
well, I'm just
and
saying-
started to build, that's what I'm
So,
concerned.
right, but I'm just saying, there are a lot of what-if scenarios. There was a lot of what-if scenarios when this went out in 2022. A lot of people said-
This is nothing like, this is,
Well,
excuse me, but it's
I
nothing like the
understand that.
WPA. This
I-
is nothing like 2022
understand that.
or 2020. This is a new way of approaching the nation.
I understand that, and that's where you as individual voters are gonna have the opportunity to make that risk assessment. So we have 2 contracts, we have the state, that was an urban action grant that was through the State Bonding Commission. So, that would be extraordinary, I think, if all of a sudden.
Yeah, that'd be
Um,
unlikely to
yeah.
get that. Yeah.
This federal one, absolutely, I will say the federal one is tied to FF&E and soft costs, not construction costs, so there's a lot more time to get through that process with the federal government. They're all worthy things to talk about, but let's just think about it. I came into office in November 2019, right? I think every year I've been in office has been an unprecedented, unusual time that we've ever lived in. So when this went to vote, people thought we were crazy, a community center, we can't even get together, to have a cup of coffee, let alone getting 500, we couldn't gather when we were still voting on this, actually. So I just have to be optimistic, and I just have to try to make a calculated, educated decision, but those are all worthy risks. If I were writing a prospectus, you'd have your risk, I used to do that, your risk factors. I never thought the federal government will honor its contracts would be one of those risk factors, right? So I have to leave that to the, but the benefit is we have time on our side with that because of the way the grant is structured. It is not for the construction, the federal money, the $3.6 million, it's for the FF&E, and it's for advisory fees and consultants and design costs. We will know pretty quickly. We ask them, when can we start getting reimbursed? As soon as you start construction. So what do you think we're gonna do? The first day is submit that receipt. So we're gonna have stages along the way where we're gonna see how this process goes. But we're no different than any community across America, whether you live in Texas or Arkansas or California, everybody's in this situation, right? So, so I think it's fair to raise that, absolutely, as a risk factor, and I just ask that that's gonna have to be something each voter's gonna have to make determination about it. So, sorry I don't have a better response.
I wish I had a better response.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know,
we all do.
it's hard, but yeah.
I'm Joe Mako, 22 Randy Drive. Thank you for all your work, but I've lived in Madison almost 50 years. I'm retired, 80 years old now. I just can't keep laying out more money every year for our taxes. Our taxes keep going up in this. I've been here, I think we had 2 traffic lights in town. Has anyone done a traffic study on all these community people that are gonna come to Madison for the Chamber of Commerce, not for me? That's part of my problem with this, is that this is a proponent. You have people pushing this because they want more money. Some of this money is gonna come out of my pocket. So, okay, operational costs, you raised it, I think, to $400,000, you said. Is that realistic, or are we gonna find out it's gonna cost $800,000 to operate this building? If it's not 30% filled, but 80% filled. You gotta have more people coming in to clean up after all these activities. So can you give us where did you come up with that figure?
So we had our facilities department head who was here, and they went through and looked at, how we manage multiple buildings. We manage very large buildings. We have high schools. They're actually cooperating with the library and custodial services. This library actually only has, a quarter of a person, I think, in terms of custodial. Yeah, so, so we've had a lot of thinking about this, and we're trying to look at everything as a campus standpoint, in terms of how we manage this. So this would be another added to the portfolio. We're talking to the library, we have the senior center, and that's how we do town campus. We don't have dedicated people in every building in town. We have a staff that moves around, and we do an incredible job, I think. I gotta give them a lot of credit of how much good work our facilities department does to keep these buildings clean, and they run lean. So they came up with that in terms of man hours and everything else, and did a whole analysis of what we thought we could do.
Does that include utilities?
And it does include utilities. There's a breakdown on the slide about utilities. We updated it with current utilities. Now they know actually what the HVAC system is gonna be in there, so there was an opportunity to look at that, and it's based with, recent utility, electricity costs and everything, so knowing the size of the building and everything. So that is the best guess. Look, I remember these same questions when the senior center was going out too. And I don't even know if they put an operating cost number out when it went out. It did not. So I made a point of making sure we addressed all those questions. Things change, things evolve. There may be a decision 5 years after this opens that more staff is needed. I can't forecast that. All I can do is look at it based on what we know today.
Morgan Warner, Kent Road. I appreciate everything that's been done. I'm relatively new to the community. I came from West Hartford and retired here. But I lived through in West Hartford the project that they did there, and there was great debate in the community on both sides. And I think in the end, everyone would agree it was a wonderful thing. And that leads to my question is, if you looked at that just as the value of that property and what it's worth, and put it out for the commercial use, restaurants or whatever, it could vitalize the town. I don't know if you've looked at that side. I just wanted, I'm sure over the years that's been discussed, so it's nothing new. But if you could just sort of give an overview of what that property might generate for tax dollars, as opposed to having to be paid for, and they oversaw the development, of Blueback Square. So the town had a lot of involvement in what ended up there. But could you just comment on that?
So there were pre-2018 a lot of conversations about that, and it was looked at as a commercial space. It never went out to RFP with any, because no one could agree on doing that. There was a lot of people in town that they wanted to see this stay in community use hands, community use, not commercial. If you go commercial, okay, you can't, your financing profile is different, right? And I think that was what drove the community center decision back in 2019 for the community center design. Could the town go back and look at those options again? We could possibly investigate it, but I will say the building is in such worse shape. We know that there's a significant cost that's whoever takes it, whether it's for restaurants. Everybody talks about, Quincy Market, all the thing everybody talks about in Stonington. I've been there, trust me. I've seen all these places, but there's a big nut that has to happen first to get that to that point, and then you have to be able to charge rent levels that would make it a functioning space. And I would gather they'd probably then be looking for tax abatements and everything else to get it up and running. So I think this board will have to talk about all that. Like I said, it was looked at probably 15 years ago, and it kind of just, the pathway ended up here with the community center, and that came from the public.
Again, I think it's also important to point out too, that when we went out to bid to developers didn't want just the building. The building was not really the attractive part of the property. It was the property itself, the 5.6 acres or whatever it is, right? It was the entire block.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't the building they were looking for.
I think that
They were just gonna
right.
the building.
I know there's some other hands raised, so.
Francine Larson, East Wharf Road. I have two questions. One, I feel really stupid asking this, but I'm still not clear. What are you asking us to vote for on May 6th? That's my first question. And the second question is, if I'm to understand, if I understood I couldn't read that well from here, but are you saying that now that the price is $25 million or 24, whatever? But then if it's 35 million, forget it, we're just gonna forget the whole thing. Well, what's your deal breaker number? What if it's 28 million? What if it's
24 million.
35 million?
24 million.
or 30 million? I mean, where's
The
the deal
24,
breaker?
so we, the public approved a resolution of what the town appropriated for this project. And that's what you voted on in 2022, and it said $15.9 million. And you can bond for $15.9 million. So you were really kind of approving two things, how much to spend and how much to bond. We're not touching the bond. We're just asking to be able to spend more and only use the grants, funds, and donations to bridge the gap from 15.9 to $24 million.
So what you're saying that in 2022, we voted okay on $30 million?
No.
You said 15 and 15?
No, what I'm saying is that when you authorized it, you allowed the town to spend $15.9 million, and you allowed the town to issue bonds up to $15.9 million to pay for the project. And any grants had to reduce the bonding. So what we're trying to do now is say, let's take those grants and put it on top of the bonding so we can spend more on the project. We're getting your approval to spend more on the project using grant money.
That's it.
Only.
That's the question.
And you're saying-
Only, and it's in the resolution, it says only.
And if you
So-
don't, and if you, but then you have to rebid this, so you really don't know how much it's gonna cost.
Yeah.
But today you're saying, well, our deal breaker number is 24.9.
Right.
And we're telling you that we would have to come back to the public again and have another referendum to spend more than $24 million on the construction of the project. So if it comes back at, look, if the bids came back at 25 or 24.4, there's value engineering. You can, okay, we'll make this little tweak. We'll use a different material. There's things in projects where you can find cost savings. But, we don't have millions of dollars in this project to do that, so.
Let me just one more thing though. I don't know anything about building, I don't know anything about this kind of stuff, but it seems really odd to me that we're being asked to approve something that we don't know how much it's gonna cost. Why is it getting bid? And then you say, here's how much it's gonna cost. Do you wanna do it or do you not?
Well, that's what we kind of did in December. That was the hope. The problem is, it was
more.
more than our budget. So, normally when you go out a project, you have a project estimate and you ask the town to allow you to spend a certain amount of money, okay? That's the normal process. Then you go out to bid. You develop a project, a building that fits that budget, and then you go out to bid. And hopefully the bids normally in the real world, unlike what we've encountered the last 3 years, normally come in within that range. You tweak it a little bit so you stay within your budget, right? We've been dealing with a construction market that's out of this world. We're not the only town dealing with this. People have had to go out and get second approvals to raise their spending on projects. So that's just it. So we kind of knew that was probably going to happen. I don't think any of us expected it would be as large as it is. We're going to go out to bid again. Now we know what the market thinks of things, right? So we had 5 responses, was it, to the bid? Yeah, so we understand how contractors are looking at this. We know where the hot buttons are. So we learn from that, and we're going to repackage it. We're going to tweak it a little bit, and it's risky, because of tariffs, right? Every day it's like up and down. Now, granted, a lot of this is domestic. We're not importing things. There's not a lot of steel in this building. The tariff thing will have an impact. If anything, it might be on the furnitures, fixtures, and equipments and things like that are imported. But hopefully, like I said, this is the world we're living in right now. There's just no guarantees. So it's a risk. If in August they come back at $30 million, we don't have the money again. We're not coming out again to ask for that funding. So, that's one of my other board members want to do that, but I'm like, I think we're done, right? Yeah. No, 2 bites at the apple and then we're done. So, so I know in the very back he had his hand raised for a while.
Thank you. Ted Cosgrove, 43 Flintlock Road. Again, thank you to the committee. This has been going on forever, as you know. My family moved here in 1968, and for the most part, my entire life has spent here as well. I would like nothing more than to see a landmark community center and being able to maintain the integrity of the academy school and make sure we memorialize it the right way. I've got a series of questions, but one of my main ones goes back to the structural components. So you addressed the septic piece, and I'm not looking to mischaracterize, but I know at some point the septic component kind of became a surprise. Why that became a surprise? The house that I live in was built in the 1960s. We had our septic redone a couple of years ago. the records don't exist in town for a 1960 thing. So again, I don't put that on the committee. There's professionals that we hired. I think that was a huge swing and a miss. The other component is the asbestos that was brought up as well. I was wondering if you could just bring a little bit more clarity to me in terms of where we stand in terms of what are the laws and regulations that are required for doing this project to do that. And I'm going to make an assumption here. We're probably doing the minimum to meet the standard on that stuff in terms of mitigation versus if we were to eliminate it altogether. What are those cost differentials? And I'm curious what the conversation looked like amongst the committee to navigate that conversation to land where you landed with the facility today.
I can't obviously answer that now. That's a very detailed conversation.
Is that something that the committee, I know we have committee members here and the chair. Is that
I mean, I
something
think
can be answered, or?
that they've looked to their advisors on the approach. Like I said, we're going to be doing what we have to do, and this is what you deal with when you're renovating any old building, especially one that dates back to the 1920s. Right. So I know there's all this concern about this, but we have to follow standards. So what I can do is, you know, we've been taking notes of questions, and we'll try to post, because a lot of people keep focusing on this. We posted a few answers already on the website to these related questions, and we'll try to expand that and give more detail.
And the background to that is, and there's tons of historical stuff everywhere where these municipal government projects take place, and unfortunately, due to engineering and the professionals that we're putting our trust in and spending this good money to, either are cutting corners or make mistakes, and they don't open on time, more money's needed to put in, and they open up a year or two later. My background's in athletics. I've done a lot of athletic facilities, worked at Yale, was involved in over $200 million of renovation projects there. There's a lot of screw-ups. There's places, high schools, et cetera, municipal, that put in these turf fields, and they don't open up for another two years because the structural piece, the foundation and the drainage and all that kind of stuff was not done properly, and it almost has to be done again. And so I just really, really hope, and again, it's not a mistrust of our volunteers, it really isn't, so please don't misconstrue it, but that's the one piece that I would hate like heck, that we did not do our due diligence with our professionals to make sure that we're not stuck a year out, 3 years out, having to readdress something that could have been addressed in the beginning, and that's where I would love to know what that potential cost differential is.
Well,
Are we talking millions and millions, or are we talking hundreds of thousands?
Well, I guess once again, we went out, we bid the project out, so I think that's a pretty good indication.
I understand that.
Yeah, so I'm just saying there's a pretty clear indication of what the professional construction market thinks of what the cost of the project is, because they actually submitted and were willing to commit and sign on the bottom line to a certain price component of what they were going to be doing. So, and there's contingency that's built into this project as well. It's for those unknowns. I mean, we have bidding, we have to go through bidding procedures. The state, we have grants especially, so we have to adhere to all the bidding procedures, and our selection process has to follow those. We have a new school, though, that's opening up in June that is on time and actually on budget, the original budget, with all the stuff that we were worried about in the height of the hyperinflation and concerned about the budget. It's actually worked out great, and it's a beautiful building, it's on budget, and I know there was a comment earlier about there is funding that was allocated to the demolition of Ryerson. The funding is there, Dennis, for what was allocated originally for the demolition of Ryerson. So that's a good example that at least the town has had, and I will say this building here also was done on time and on budget. And when the library was constructed and opened in 2022, was completed, or 2020. So, you know, I think we've been successful. Unfortunately, though, we've been cost constrained. We can all talk about the high school and all the compromises that were made. That was not because of the advisors, that was because the Madison taxpayers only wanted to spend a certain amount of money in the building, so compromises were made. And, you know, but it's still completed a beautiful high school that we've been able to use for 20 years. And part of the reason that we can keep the mill rate down is that debt's now paid off. This is the last year. So, you know, we're managing these projects, you know, and we're in the middle of the library right now. So, but I hear what you're saying. There's always that risk. We try to hire good professionals. We go through a public process, and it's always done in a public meeting when these decisions are made. Any other questions? I know the gentleman in the back has been trying, so.
Perhaps you have another committee member. Charles Rees, Neck Road. Very simple question. Have the grantors signed off on the redirection of funds in terms of using it to expand the project as opposed to paying down debt?
The grantors don't have anything to do with that. That's our bonding resolution, so they just give us the money. They don't, it's just, as long as it's going towards the project. Yeah, so they don't really get involved in, how, as long as we're keeping to our share, of the project, which we are, the 15.9 million, that doesn't really impact the grant payments. Yes?
So, Chris Ryan, Wildcat Road, probably the easiest question. The 3 buildings adjacent to this, the Youth and Family Services, Probate, and I guess it's historic, will they be impacted in any way during construction or because of the renovation? And same question, I guess, for the fields in the back. Are those fields going to remain open?
Fair question. I don't think there should be any disruption, but obviously it's going to be busy and there's going to be construction parking. They're going to have to close off some things while this is going on, if it goes on for a year. The fields, I think there is going to be an impact, yeah.
You're going to have to play softball somewhere else, Chris.
Yeah. And I know that Austin has been dealing with all the different athletic groups about how we'll swing that for a year, which he did a great job on the exchange field project, right? And got through that, so we'll figure it out. But there's been thinking, he's already kind of got a plan. It got delayed, so we don't have to worry about it. At least we're talking in the fall, right? Because of all the timing of this, but, so. Any other questions? Yes?
Terry Vanderbilt for Bartlett Drive. First of all, I do appreciate. I'm trying. I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this. I've been following it for years. I've lived in Madison off and on since 1972, and now live in my mom and dad's old house. And I've seen a lot of changes going on, and there are a lot of changes to come. I initially voted in favor of keeping the building because I thought it was the best thing to do, but times have changed, and I still love the building, but I don't think this is the best way to go for it. When we talk about the Academy Advisory Committee, the top 5 items that people were looking for at the time, in that time that survey was done in 2019, not one single one of those is actually what's going to be available to us in spending $24 million, because only 1/3 of the building will be available for use, and that will be for municipal offices. So those municipal offices will be beautiful for $24 million, but the other 2/3 of the building will not be for use until we get more money to then remediate and take care of the hazardous materials, the lead paint, the asbestos, all of that to open up the rest of the building. Take note in here when they reference community space, that community space also references the very wide hallways. Well, you're not going to do anything with a wide hallway, but if they're saying that's available to you as community space, it's not. Wow. So, in back here on this page,
I just want to comment. First of all, 14% is municipal space. I have a slide that demonstrates that. And in terms of unavailable, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Like the plans that you've seen, the floor plans and everything show the spaces that will be available.
And that hasn't changed since we voted on it in 2022. And the floor plan for the upper level and the basement where Madison Youth and Family Services are occupying space, that will be renovated, that will be available for them to use, but a lot of the rest of the space in the building will not.
No, that's not, no, that's why no. That would have been if we stayed at 15.9. That's what we talked about a year and a half ago. But what we're proposing now, the 24 million, finishes all the spaces. So all the rooms will be open for use.
Even with lead paint?
Yeah, we're following, lead, I feel like we've just got to post something online, because there's this big focus on lead paint. Right now, the budget here allows for all the rooms to be open and used by the community. And youth and family space is pretty much the same footprint that it was in 2022, as well as beach and rec. So there's not going to be a lot of shuttered spaces waiting for abatement. This includes everything that was in the construction design package that went out to bid in the fall.
Will there
So,
be any shuttered spaces?
No, it's all.
Yeah.
Okay. On the opportunity summary, it says it solves critical space needs for town government while also avoiding potential future capital
Right.
investments. The Jeffrey building is gonna close. That's nearly 50,000 square feet there available for government use. We know that, but it's not being highlighted in the discussion of the Academy building. And there's been no decision made on what is going to happen to the Jeffrey building.
right.
So once the Neck Road School opens, Jeffrey will be closed. That will be another vacant building, something to think about.
Yeah, we have a facilities committee right now that is reviewing all the town, the inventory of all town land and buildings. And obviously what happens with Academy will have a big impact on what we think about doing with those other buildings. There's options for all of them and a lot of discussion, but this is kind of an important segue, or decision point to direct us one way or the other. If this passes, then these needs are met, and then we will deal with those other buildings through a holistic master planning process.
Just two small comments. It was stated that this meets the demand for, the community demands for unmet needs. But we have all those facilities. We're not even looking at them yet and what we're gonna do with them. And the comment was made that we don't think we can take the building, the academy, for affordable housing, and that the town didn't wanna give up the land. Things have changed. And that plan can change, and you have the power to do it, and so do we.
Well, that's the whole point. It is a different world. People might have voted yes the first time, and now they might vote no. But that's why our board wanted you, the public, to have that decision. We offered a way to make this happen because we got these grants. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And so now it's up to you to decide. Do we want to take advantage of the grants and move on with this and get this done, or do we want to take a step back and think of something else? Plan B. I just don't know what Plan B is because we've had Plan B, C, D, E, F, and G, and none of them got anywhere, and so we might have to go back and look at all that again. But thank you for your comments.
Just
So
one last comment. You're gonna mail out a postcard 3 days from now. What would be on that postcard?
it just says that the town is going to have a question related to the Academy project, and it tells you where to go to vote, and it says taxpayers can vote and things like that.
And thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Any other questions? I mean, we're past 5:30, so you can email askacademy@MadisonTV.org, and we will try to answer you. And thank you for coming, and just make an informed vote, and I appreciate, everybody's efforts to be here in person. I know I forgot about online, we were kind of lost online. Are there hands raised? Okay, so I'll try to take the online, maybe, I'm just thinking it's time to wrap this up. We can't see them either. Okay, why don't you have them, can you tell them to put their questions in the chat, and then we will post them online? And then they'll be posted online, okay? All right, thank you very much.